welcome to another Every Tuesday tutorial. In this week's tutorial, we're creating a shaded floral. So what you see on screen is exactly what we're going to be creating together. If I zoom in here, you can see we've got some shading on all of our petals to kind of simulate depth and really make the floral start lifting from the screen. And you can see we've got it in our leaves as well. So the color palette for this tutorial is entirely free. As always, just tap on the link in the video description. You can download and install it. We're actually only using 2 brushes for this entire project, and both of them are free. The first one is my mono weight brush. You can pick it up when you become a free Every Tuesday email subscriber. And then the second one is a default Procreate texture brush. So I'm going to create a brand new canvas that is 1500 pixels by 1500 pixels at 300 DPI, and then we can get started. Okay, I've got my canvas all set up, so the first thing we're going to do is drop in a background color. So come to your layers palette, tap on background color, and grab the very first color in your color palette right here just to drop that in. And then the next thing we're going to do is begin drawing all of our elements, and then we'll apply the shading to it at the very end. So come back to your layers palette, make sure layer 1 is selected, and then choose this light pink color for your petals, and now we can start drawing our petals. I've got my free mono weight brush selected, so that's what we're going to be using for this. My size is at about 4%, and if you caught some of my other previous tutorials, I'll link them on screen and in the video description. You will already know how to draw this, but this is a little more advanced than a beginner style tutorial. So if you're brand new to Procreate, I would definitely recommend checking those out first, and you'll be perfectly prepared for this tutorial. We're utilizing a lot of clipping mass and layer organization, so that's what makes this one a little bit more advanced. So for the petal shape, it's actually just a pointed oval. So we're going to have 4 petals in the front. So each petal is going to look basically like this. So I'm going to drop color into 1, and then I'm going to create a brand new layer. So let's label this petal 1. It's really important that every petal is on its own layer, otherwise the effect won't be as strong. So make sure you're putting each one of these on their own layer. So create a brand new layer. We're going to add another petal. And you want to make sure that the points touch. So if you're not sure if they're touching, because we need to have a closed path in order to fill it, just turn off the visibility of the previous one, and then you can keep working like that. We're going to label this petal 2, create a brand new layer. Just for reference, we're going to turn on the previous one. Let me turn them off to make sure I've got ends that touch, and they do. Label this one petal 3. Okay, turn these ones on, create a brand new layer, last petal. Okay, so I've got all of my petals now listed right here, and they're all on separate layers. And now we're going to add some petals to the background. That way the flower looks like it's kind of opening up, and we can add in some extra depth to really push this effect even further. So in order to add the background petals, we need to create a layer that's all the way in the back of these petals. So create a brand new layer, drag that layer all the way down underneath petal 1. And we can label this one back petals. So these ones are going to start at the bottom, and we're just going to kind of loosely draw where they would be. So these ones are kind of all grouped together, and I'm going to turn off the visibility of the rest of them, make sure that my bottom connects, and I'm actually going to make this just a little bit cleaner here so it really connects nicely, and then I can fill it in with color. Let's make sure every part gets filled in. Okay, now we're in really good shape, but this one's going to be just a little bit reduced on the opacity. That way it looks like it's behind everything. So tap on the little N and drag this down to 90%. Okay, and now when we turn our other ones on, you can tell that this one just has a little bit of reduced opacity right there. It looks like it's maybe a bit of a different shade. All right, so we're moving right along. These ones are all of our petals, so we're going to group these together. Hit group. We're going to label this one petals. And now we can move on to our stem. So let's create our stem now. Create a brand new layer, label this one stem. This one's going to be this lightest green color, so it's the one all the way at the very end. So I'm going to increase my brush size to about 12%. And then we're just going to draw a stem coming from the petals down, and then we're going to draw an additional stem that comes up, and we can place a bud on this one. I'm going to reduce the size of my brush down to like 4%, and then I'm going to create the transition area between the stem and the petals. Okay, fill that in with color, and that looks good. All right, so now we're going to create the bud that's going to be over here. So I'm going to create a brand new layer, drag it underneath the stem layer, label this one bud. We're going to grab our light pink color again, and we're just going to draw an oval and drop in color. And now this one also needs a transition area, so we're going to return to the stem layer, grab our light green color again, and draw a very simple transition. So this one's just going to kind of look like the petal shape on both sides. All right, so that's looking really good. Next, we're going to start drawing our leaves, and our leaves we want to keep on a separate layer. So create a brand new layer above the bud layer. So select the bud layer, create a brand new layer, and now we're going to draw our leaves. So I'm going to have a leaf right here. Okay, I'm going to turn off my stem layer, that way I can make sure all these did close up, and they did, so now I can drop in color. Okay, now we're going to add in the lines that go on our leaves, and we're going to utilize a clipping mask for this. So first let's label this leaves. Create a brand new layer right above the leaves layer. Add a clipping mask to this. So tap on the layer thumbnail, choose clipping mask, and then tap on the layer thumbnail again and rename it to just say lines. We want these lines to be just a little bit lighter in color than our leaves, so we can do that really easily by just tapping on the N, choosing screen, and I'm going to reduce the opacity down to like 25%. So it's going to be a really subtle effect, and I'm going to keep my same light green color that we've been using. And all you want to do is just draw a line straight through from the top to the bottom. Okay, let's turn our stem layer back on and kind of get a look at everything together. I want to center this up a little bit because it's not centered and it's kind of bugging me. So I'm going to just slide everything over, select it, and then just move it so it's a little more balanced here. All right, that looks better. So now we are at the fun part where we get to add in our shading and really bring it to life. So we're going to begin with our petals, and then we'll move on to our leaves to finish everything up. So for the petals, this is definitely the most complex part. So just make sure that you are following along with me with what layer you're on, what clipping mask you're on, the color, and the blend mode. So we've got a lot of moving parts right here. So just keep that in mind as we work. So for the very first petal right here, whenever you're adding shading, you have to keep in mind where your light source is or where the light might be hitting the object where you're applying the shading. So for this petal, on the very far left, I know that this petal is going to overlap it. So right underneath this edge is where I'm going to naturally have shading because this portion of my artwork is overlapping this portion. So I'm going to grab my light pink color again. We're going to return to our petals group. I'm going to find my very first petal, create a brand new layer above it. I'm going to label this one Petal 1 Shading. I'm going to change the blend mode of this to multiply, so tap on the little N, scroll up and grab multiply. And for the brush, I'm going to come to my brushes, come all the way down to the charcoals category. This is just a default brush, so everyone should have this. And I'm using this 2B compressed brush. It's right at the very top. And the size that I'm using, let's see, is at 5%. Let's see. Yeah, that looks good. So we've got a 5% brush. We've got our Petal 1 shading layer all ready to go. It's got a multiply blend mode. And this is going to be a very similar process for all the other petals that we do. So we need to make sure that whatever we put on this layer is only going to show up on Petal 1. So we need to apply a clipping mask. Tap on the layer thumbnail and choose clipping mask. And now we're going to shade this area nice and gently. If you want to go over the same part, it'll become more dense and just darker. So it's up to you how much shading you'd like to go in. But as you get closer to the edge of the petal, you definitely want to make sure that you're painting in a little lighter because you want that really nice, beautiful transition from light to dark. So already you can see when we zoom out, we're getting a really nice effect. And even down here where the transition area is happening, I could even add a little bit of extra shading down here where it's coming up from the bottom. So that is the shading for Petal 1. Now we're going to move to Petal 2. And Petal 2 is going to be my frontmost petal. I have 4 here. So I know in the back of my mind, I want Petal 2 to cover up Petal 1 and Petal 3, and then Petal 3 is going to cover up Petal 4. So we got a lot of reordering that we're going to be doing too to accommodate where the shading is going to take place. So because Petal 2 is going to be my frontmost petal, the shading is actually going to happen right down the very center because these other 2 sides are going to overlap the petals that are behind them. Hopefully that makes sense. Let's come to Petal 2, create a brand new layer. We're going to label this Petal 2 Shading. We're going to apply a clipping mask, and we're going to change the blend mode to multiply. So the exact same thing that we just did, only this time when we put in our shading, it's going to go directly down the center of the petal. Okay, so as you can see right now, we've got petal 3 covering up petal 2, but I don't want that to happen. I want petal 2 to be in the very front of all of my other petals. So I'm going to reorder them. So I'm going to grab my petal 2 shading and I'm going to toggle over my petal 2 layer. So now they're both selected. I'm going to drag them both above petal 4. So drag, and there we go. So now this one is the frontmost petal, which is exactly what I want it to be. Because now my petal 3 is going to be covered up by this edge, and I can put in the same type of shading that I just used for petal 1. So I'm going to come back to my layers, return to petal 3, create a brand new layer above it, label this one petal 3 shading, change the blend mode to multiply, and remember to apply a clipping mask. And now we can come in and do the exact same thing we did with petal 1, only now this part is behind the petal. Okay, and now we're going to repeat the same process, but we want petal 4 behind petal 3. So we need to reorder our layers one more time. So I've got petal 4 right here, and we want it beneath petal 3. So tap on petal 4 and drag it underneath petal 3. When you do that, it's going to automatically apply a clipping mask to it because it thinks that you are grouping it with the petal 1 shading. All you have to do is tap on the layer thumbnail and uncheck clipping mask by tapping on it. Now we're back to normal. That part's really important. All right, so now we're going to apply petal 4 shading, and then all of these petals will be all taken care of with their shading. So I'm going to create a brand new layer, label this one petal 4 shading, change the blend mode to multiply, tap on the layer thumbnail and apply a clipping mask to the shading layer. And now we're going to do the exact same thing we just did for petal 3. Okay, so you can already see that we're getting some really beautiful depth happening with our petals. So now we just need to apply some extra shading to our back petals. That way it looks like the flower is opening up. So in order to do that, we're going to come all the way down to our back petals. We're going to create a brand new layer, label this one back petals shading. Okay, so just like we did before, we're going to apply a blend mode of multiply. So tap on the layer thumbnail, multiply, apply a clipping mask, tap on the layer thumbnail and choose clipping mask, and make sure you still have your light pink color selected. And now we're just going to brush in just shy of the edges of the petals. So it looks like it's really dark on the inside of the flower because it's opening up. So I usually go over this a few times just to make the texture a lot denser, just to let the eye know that it's really dark on the inside. All right, that's looking really good. And the very last thing we want to do with this flower and these petals is, if you look at petals in real life, they kind of have a little bit of transparency to them. And it's really fun to integrate that because it's so easy to do in Procreate. So in order to do that, all you want to do, we're not going to touch our back petals at all anymore. So don't apply this to the back petals, but to the front petals, I'm just going to reduce their opacity. If I come to petal 2, which is right here, so I'm just going to tap on the N and drag it down to 90% just to give myself a little bit of transparency. And now if I zoom in here, you can kind of slightly see the petals that are behind it, and it just seems a little bit more realistic. So now I'm going to do the exact same thing with petal 3, petal 4, and petal 1. Okay, now if we zoom out, you can see that's a really fun, really pretty and subtle effect. All right, so that flower is totally done now, and now we can add some shading to our bud. And our shading for our bud, we're going to have our light source kind of coming in from the top. So we just want some shading around the base where this transition occurs, and then just a little bit on the right side of it. So we're going to repeat the exact same process that we did with our petals. I'm going to close up that group now because we're totally done. I'm going to create a brand new layer above the bud layer, change the blend mode to multiply, name this bud shading, apply a clipping mask by tapping on the layer thumbnail, choose clipping mask, make sure you still have your 2B compressed brush selected. I'm still at 5%, and just brush a little bit down here and a little on the side. Okay, all we have left to do is the leaves now. So we can come up to our leaves, and we're going to create a brand new layer above the lines layer. And we're going to apply a clipping mask, so tap on the layer thumbnail, choose clipping mask. We're going to rename this one leaves shading. We're going to leave our blend mode at normal because we're changing our color this time. So grab your dark green color, make sure you still have your 2B compressed brush selected, and we're going to make sure that it's at 5% size. And right at the base of your leaves, we're just going to add a little bit of shading. And you can even add a little bit towards the top edge of this one because of the shadow being created by the flower itself. Same thing over here. So that is our shaded floral with just a few simple steps and rules to follow using all free brushes and a free color palette. You can see how easy it is to really create that sense of depth on a normally flat object. Once again, the links to everything mentioned in this tutorial are right in the video description, the free brushes and the color palette. If you enjoyed this tutorial, please hit the like button, subscribe, and don't forget to hit the bell icon so you'll be notified of new tutorials just like this one in the future. For more Procreate freebies and tutorials, head on over to my site, every-tuesday.com. You can also find me over on Instagram. My handle is everytuesday. If you try this out and post it there, I would love it if you tag me. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you next week.